Thank you so much for joining us for Look Before You Speak. This is a program in Missoula here that celebrates people who are gifts to our community. And today we have a very special guest who's going to talk about some very special images as well. Our guest is Ted Hughes. He's the registrar at the Missoula Art Museum. Part of the format of the program is to take the opportunity to take a longer look at images. So often in television, the images are up for 1, 2, maybe 3 seconds. So we really take our time in this program and look at images and talk about them. The Missoula Art Museum is the caretaker of the Paxson murals that are in the courthouse, and they just celebrated their 100th anniversary, which was it 1914 they were installed?
Yes.
So, and they're currently being stored while the courthouse is being renovated. So I thought we'd take this time to talk a little bit about them and also thank Ted for overseeing their care and custody for the county of Missoula. So, Ted, welcome.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
And your background is in art history, isn't it?
I have a master's in art history.
And how long have you worked at the Missoula Art Museum?
8.5 years.
So you've really overseen a lot of the murals as far as being conserved and then being put away in storage, and perhaps they're going to reformat them when they put them back into the original structure.
They're going to have better frames, more beautiful, elegant frames when they go back up, possibly this fall.
Oh, that's great. Now, the murals originally, when they were installed, were, I think they were adhered directly onto the concrete. So there's been a great deal of conservation under the supervision of the museum, and they're restretched and they're in pretty good shape from what I understand.
But they were glued right on the wall, which didn't let them breathe very well, and it also damaged them with moisture and mold. So by the 60s, they were starting to fall apart, and there was mold visible on them and flaking, so the county and the state raised quite a bit of money to have them all professionally conserved by a conservator in New York City. And he stretched them on these aluminum stretchers, bars, that allow them to breathe now. And they're in really good shape still. That was the late 70s, early 80s, and they're looking good.
Well, let's take a look at one or two of them. And now, oh boy, this is an iconic image for Missoula, isn't it?
Yeah. This is Chief Charlo and the Salish leaving the Bitterroot. In another painting, we'll see a painting of the treaty where they signed away their rights to the Bitterroot Valley without realizing it, but it was traditionally part of their land in their hunting area. And this must have been, what, the 1890s?
So, yeah, I think that's correct. Now,
the army who's not present in this painting
is escorted
the Salish out of the Bitterroot.
Now, that's Lolo Peak in the background there. Yeah. It's interesting that how did this process come about where these paintings that are about the Missoula region or area were to be placed in the courthouse?
Well, when the courthouse was built, I believe it opened in 1912, they just used a stock decoration company who put up these sort of generic stock paintings in the courthouse entryway. And the people of Missoula did not like them at all, and they started complaining about them right away. It's typical Missoula, it's still the same today, where if they don't like something, they'll step up and say it. But it was spearheaded by the Women's Club of Missoula to raise the money to hire Paxson to do a series of paintings that had to do with the history of the valley itself. and not some sort of generic subject matter. And Paxson agreed to do it for a deal. All the paintings he did for $1,500, which was a steal at the time. And he said he'd complete them in 1 year. It took him about 16 months.
Yeah. So they were installed in 1914. Here's another mural that we can look at. And tell us about this.
This is the Hellgate Treaty. That's Governor Stevens in the middle, and the Salish people are signing away their rights to the Bitterroot, but they didn't realize it at the time. And to be moved on, to eventually be moved on to the Flathead Reservation. And it has lots of characters in there. And there's, Paxton's paintings have this sort of stillness to them that you can see in this one. And there's these kind of funny, gigantic teepees in the background too. But sort of a traditional, almost Civil War portrait looking Governor Stevens in the middle there, staring out at us.
And where is the location of this painting supposed to have?
That's at Council Grove, I believe, which is a state park now, just west of town.
That's great. Let's look at another mural here.
So here's Lewis crossing the Clark Fork. After they went out all the way to the coast and were coming back, Lewis and Clark split up. And Clark went south and Lewis continued east. And when they came out, they took the long way, the long, hard way. Sacagawea kind of took them all the way down the Rocky Mountains to her people in Idaho. But when they came back, the Nez Perce said,
they had gone over Lolo, so they were coming back that way. Yeah.
if you're going to go back to the plains, you should just go this way,
Yeah. Yeah.
up the Blackfoot. And the Nez Perce just assumed that the Lewis and Clark were going to get killed by the Blackfeet. So they said, arrivederci, it was nice knowing you.
Well, it's really, I think it's one of the treasures that's here in the community, the fact that the Women's Club stood up for a local artist and local stories. And certainly there's been a lot of work and maybe revisionist history and actually some formatting of history and interpretation that's occurred over the years in interpreting the murals. And I know a great deal of scholarship's gone into that as well. So the county is extremely fortunate to have responsible caretakers overseeing their care and custody. So, and
Yeah.
what's going on here?
Well, this is a couple, 2-3 years ago, and the Paxson murals the paintings were taken down off the wall and crated, and they're in secure storage now while the county goes through its renovation and restoration of that part of the courthouse, which they're just working on right now, and it's looking very beautiful.
Yeah. Well, that's great, and I think there's, how many murals are there altogether?
There's 8.
And different sizes and scales. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people in Missoula forget that this is such a wonderful opportunity to take visitors to and show them a lot of true stories that were about the community.
Tourists go there all the time
Yeah.
to look at them.
And they're in the front. The front part of the courthouse is there's a rotunda and entryway and a grand staircase. So you walk up through the murals themselves, and I see that this is a slide of some of the murals being removed, and they're up pretty high.
Yes.
So you have an opportunity to go up the stairwell and see them kind of at different angles. And they're scheduled to be reinstalled when?
Last I heard, possibly this fall. They'll be finished. They're planning on having that part of the courthouse remodeled, and then they'll be able to rehang the paintings.
I think a lot of people don't realize how active Paxson was. And, you know, he did a great number of murals in the state capitol. And, you know, he was kind of a frontiersman. I know that he had come out here and he had arrived here the year after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And he was very obsessed with documenting and recording that event, and probably led to the masterpiece that he did, which, you know, is down at the Cody Museum.
The Custer's Last Stand painting.
Yeah. And is this a drawing of him? Or
No, that's a photograph of our guy, Paxson. He knew how to make his own buckskins. He was a crack shot. He knew how to make moccasins. He really wanted to be a frontiersman, but he just got out here just a little too late. The frontier was coming to an end.
And when we were visiting earlier, you were saying he was good friends with Charlie Russell. And boy, there's the
Russell had a lot of admiration for him. Yeah.
That's the hip strip, man.
That's the hip strip. There's the Babs. And there's Paxson on his horse in his frontiersman outfit.
And, you know, he remained active in the local militia, what probably would have is today the National Guard. He was active in that group. And I know that he went away and served in the Philippines.
Yeah. He was an officer, I believe a lieutenant in the Guard, and he volunteered to go fight in the Philippines War, even though he was 46 years old at the time. And there's two things I've heard. Either he got malaria. I've heard he got malaria and was really sick. And another thing I heard was that the ship he was on was in a storm and he got his ribs crushed by a crate or something. So he was debilitated from one of those two things pretty much for the rest of his life.
I think when Kirby Lambert with the Historical Society did talk a great deal about his struggle with malaria when he came back. Excuse me. And, you know, the State Historic Museum has a fine archive of his sketchbooks and journals. And, you know, I think that Missoulians are really looking forward to the reinstallation of the murals, and wanted to thank you and the museum for being great caretakers of a local treasure.
Well, and yourself as well. You were curator at the museum for, what was it, 55 years? 25 years?
This book was it came out during the all of the attention that was given to the Lewis and Clark expedition, but the Patrick Gass, who was on the expedition, he also wrote a journal. And so when this came out, they did use a reproduction of this crossing, and this is supposed to be Patrick Gass right in the center of Paxson's mural. And Paxson attempted to be pretty faithful to historically. And
Yes.
but I think you know, all the details of history are come up to the teller. And anyway, this book, and I can show that. And there's a lot of good books out there on Paxson. And I think there's hasn't been a definitive biography produced about him yet, but I think that will come about.
There's E.S. Paxson, Frontier Artist, which was written by his grandson. And I think that's the most in-depth one about Paxson.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming out today, and thanks for participating in this program. And I want to invite Missoulians, when the murals are installed, to take them back in. They're going to look wonderful, reframed, reformatted, and probably repositioned a little bit just to protect them a little bit more.
And I believe the commissioners will rededicate the murals to the people of Missoula County.
Well, that's great. So I want to thank you for coming out and thank you for filling us in on everything that's going on. And thanks for tuning in.